Welcome to Next Level Play Therapy, a weekly podcast dedicated to supporting the next generation of child and adolescent therapists to provide exceptional play therapy services. We'll explore all things play therapy to elevate your work with children and adolescents using the therapeutic powers of play. I'll discuss practical tips and ideas so you can provide a transformative experience for your young clients and make a real difference in their lives. So get ready to take your play therapy skills to the next level and make a lasting impact in the lives of children, adolescents, and families. Hey there, welcome to this week's episode of Level Up Play Therapy, helping you to accomplish excellence in play therapy. And this week, I wanted to tackle a topic that I haven't talked about recently, which is trauma. Even more so, I think it's something that's really misunderstood in child serving communities. And I would say, as child serving professionals, especially when we're working with traumatized children, I think it's important for us to understand the impact of preverbal trauma. Preverbal trauma is trauma that occurs prior to the development of language. So we know within those first 2 years of life, there's a lot of development going on. And part of that development is language. So if a child experiences trauma before they have the capacity for language, does that mean the trauma doesn't really impact the child? They'll get over it or they don't remember it. That's a lot of what we typically hear. And that's tied in the mistaken understanding or mistaken belief that because I can't articulate and use my language to tell you what happened, then it probably hasn't impacted me. And what we know from research over the last several decades and through the book that was written by Bessel Van der Kolk, The Body Keeps Score. Also, there's other work, this is where that somatic experiencing kind of theory has developed, the work of Peter Levine and some of the other early researchers about the impact of trauma. And what we know is that it is stored in the body. And so that's what I want to talk about today if we're working with children and especially early childhood. But I would say, honest, I would even look at this if you're working with adults or you're working with adolescents or older children, like older middle school or elementary age. I think this is something that needs to be explored. And I think this is where it really makes a difference when you take the time at the beginning, like that very first session with your clients early on, before you even get started with play therapy. Do a very thorough psychosocial assessment and use that information that you've gathered from your psychosocial assessment and use that as part of your early clinical case conceptualization. And I thought this study, it's not a study as much as it is a case study. The article, it was published in the Journal of Infant, Child, and Adolescent Psychotherapy. It's a case study about a client, they changed the name, who had, or it might just be a case study where they used a culmination. They didn't really say, but it's basically a case study that walks you through using a theoretical framework how they conceptualized the problem and how they used play therapy to address preverbal trauma in a child. And they kind of walk you through all the stages of the play therapy process and explain that. So I thought it was a really good article. in the Journal of Infant, Child, and Adolescent Psychotherapy to highlight one, not only that, yes, there is research that supports preverbal trauma does still have an impact. And in this particular article, they kind of walk you through conceptualizing the problem. What exactly is the problem? Why is it happening? And then using a specific intervention, which in this case would be child psychoanalytic play therapy, using that specific intervention to help the child address the impact. So I thought it was a really good case study that highlighted the role of case conceptualization and treatment planning, and how play therapy, when you use a specific theoretical model, in this case, they used psychoanalytic play therapy to help a young client overcome the impact of that trauma. So let's get into it today. First, before we get started, I just wanted to welcome everyone today. If you're here, I would love to see who's here. Post your name in the comments, what population you work with. Do you work with young children, or do you work with clients who have experienced preverbal trauma? And how have you gone about helping to address that and to overcome that impact of that? And I'd love to know where you're from, what population you work with. Go ahead and post that in the comments. So I'm Cathi Spooner. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a registered play therapist supervisor, and I have been in the child and adolescent mental health field since the late 1980s. Is where I got started in residential treatment and then went on to get my master's degree, and then pursuing play therapy for the last 20 years. I was introduced to play therapy in the late 1980s. It took me a while to find it. And get to training. And what a difference once I got the training. So I am passionate about play therapy. And now at this point in my career, teaching the next generation of play therapists. So welcome, Steph. Welcome, Steph. Finally made it. Agency has pretty basic psychosocial assessment for the intake. Do you have a list or resource on the questions to ask that to glean that early childhood info? In fact, Steph, I do. And you're in Play Therapy Academy. So I think you've been in long enough the course on getting grounded in play therapy, case conceptualization. That course will have dropped into your Play Therapy account. There is, I'll have a whole workbook in there on questions to ask and why to ask them. A lot of where this will come up also is in developmental history. And there's a whole document in there on questions to ask. And then I also walk you through that. And I forgot what module it is. I kind of walk you through the questions, why you should ask them, what you're looking for. And then that kind of helps you with your case conceptualization from there. So yes, and you have access to that. So welcome, Patricia, another Play Therapy Academy member. Welcome. Patricia is a school-based therapist, elementary school age, a lot of trauma, including preverbal trauma. So have you used some of the TFCBT? Have used some TFCBT and CCPT, which is child-centered play therapy. And in my mind, when you're talking about really young kids, in this article, they were talking about, they used a case study of Darren, and Darren is a 5-year-old in this article. And so to me, child-centered play therapy is a really good model to use. When I was reading through the study, I've read through this, not study, but the article a couple of times. What they did, I thought that was really interesting. They walked you through each stage and how they conceptualized the themes they were understanding and how they addressed it. And I was thinking about some of the slight nuances in the difference between child-centered play therapy and psychoanalytic play therapy. And I think a lot of the play therapy models for this age, that really young child age, there are a lot of similarities in the model. But what you'll find is in the model, and I think is important when you're working with children with preverbal trauma, because they're not going to have the language to explain it to you necessarily. If you think about it, the trauma occurred at a time where language hadn't developed. So it's stored more somatically through the senses in the body. And one of the benefits, and this article highlights that a lot, one of the benefits is using play therapy to allow expression. So using metaphors, using symbolism. We do that with child-centered play therapy too. We just kind of respond a little differently. Psychoanalytic play therapy is going to respond as well. So that was really interesting. Welcome, Christina. LCSW in an elementary school using CCPT, child-centered play therapy, and CBT with all my students. That's awesome. So welcome, everyone. And let's go ahead and get started. Feel free to jump in with a question. The only thing that I would ask is, because this is a public forum and these videos live on the internet indefinitely, I would just ask that we not share any specific client information. If you want to share kind of general questions and talk about general issues that in your experience you've had, feel free to do that. If you are watching on the live, on the replay, go ahead and post your comments. If you are listening on the podcast, feel free to post comments and let's get started. So what are we talking about today? We're talking about today, how can play therapy heal preverbal trauma? And I'm looking at a study. If you go back into the description notes, you'll get the information for the study that I'm referencing in case you're interested in reading the study and if you have access to it. It was really good, a lot of really good information. One of the things I really liked about this article is how they used their theoretical model and walked through each stage. They also talked a little bit, I loved this part where they talked a little bit about where they got it wrong and doing that self-assessment that we do as therapists to get a better sense of, why did I go that way? That ended up derailing us a little bit. Let me get back to my case conceptualization. Let me get back to my play therapy model, and then I'll get back on track. And this is going to happen. It doesn't matter how experienced you are. These were experienced professionals that were talking, that wrote this article. We all get derailed. This is where, when we use our case conceptualization and we stick to our play therapy model and we stay true to that, then it guides us through when we get lost, because we're going to get lost. Our clients can be complex. They can be challenging. So it's important to make sure to get back to our model, get back to your case conceptualization to help you get back on track. So let me give you a little overview of the study. I've talked a little bit about it so you have a little bit of an overview of it. What they talk about in the study regarding preverbal trauma is the idea of sensory motor experiences and episodic memory. So if we're talking about preverbal trauma and that it's stored in the body somatically prior to language development, it's still there. Just because we can't verbalize and explain the whole process to you doesn't necessarily mean it isn't there. So in this study, they talked about sensory motor experiences and episodic memory, which kind of got me going down a rabbit trail into Dr. Google and finding some other really good research. This would be like open access articles that you can get. about sensory motor experiences, just kind of do a refresher on that, because I think that adds more depth to understanding the topic. So one of the things that has been discovered is the connection between sensory motor experiences and cognitive development. So think about those first 2 years of life: language development, cognitive development, motor development, the growth and development that happens over those first 2 years of life is phenomenal. So in this, I just wanted to read a couple of, like a quote from the article, just because I thought it was really good and provided some really good information. And so they quoted the work of Dan Stern. So this was a quote. They said, Dan Stern's 1985 important work from a relational lens. And I always liked, when I'm looking at neuroscience, I'm also looking at attachment. So we're looking at that relational neuroscience. Daniel Siegel calls it interpersonal neurobiology. It's basically that neurobiology of attachment and attachment relationships, and how that impacts development and many areas of our lives. So that's one of the things that kind of drew me to this idea as well, because when we look at trauma, I always think we need to look at it within a relational context, which is why I always go back to attachment. So the quote is Dan Stern's 1985 important work from a relational lens on the development of subjectivity in infancy and early childhood contributed to our recognition that babies, through their various sensoria, are from birth continuously experiencing and processing information from their environment. Sensory motor experiences at what Stern describes as emergent, core, and intersubjective levels of the self, all occurring developmentally before the emergence of verbal language, can lead to memory traces that remain encoded within all of us. So let me break that down a tiny bit. Basically, what they're talking about is go back to, so when we're talking about sensory motor, we're looking at developmental theories of Piaget when he talked about that sensory motor period. And here he was talking about cognitive development. What we're also thinking about is how all of that experiences through our senses, through our movement, because we have those proprioceptor systems that tell us where we are in space and relationship and that movement. So it's the whole body experience of development and understanding those experiences that we are having as babies, and then we're making sense of them. We have this thing called episodic memory, and episodic memory is how we make sense of, it's our memory about things that have happened to us and our perception of those things. Our episodic memory begins from birth, and some people would say will begin in utero. I tend to go back and say it begins in utero. And so think about that from a preverbal trauma standpoint, from a bodily experience of things. Those are getting encoded, not in my memory, in my brain and in my body, and how I am now experiencing the world and my understanding of my sense of who I am. What we know from a lot of the work of Alan Shore and those attachment researchers who looked at research and who looked at attachment and brain development is that we begin to develop a sense of who we are from those attachment relationships and our experiences of what occurs. So if you look at this from that lens, we look at this from episodic memory, from those sensory motor experiences, all of those things that happen to us prior to language developing, then we begin to conceptualize now what possibly might have happened. One of the things that I regularly look for is early childhood experiences of what we would call medical trauma. And I look for that because what I found is people don't necessarily think of that. I don't think it's from our culture. I would also say within our mental health profession, even in child serving professions, working with children, I don't think we recognize the impact that those invasive medical procedures can have on children, even medical procedures that are life-saving. They had to have these in order to survive. They needed to happen. One of the things to think about, though, is how is the child doing in any areas in their life? A lot of anxiety that doesn't seem to make any sense. Behavior, emotion dysregulation. Are there any of those things that have occurred that maybe don't necessarily make sense because they have attentive parents, they pretty, well functioning. We just have to be good enough more often than not. Thank goodness. And if they have some kind of, I would say, symptoms in abundance or excess symptoms that are kind of interfering their life, a lot of people begin to look at, is it autism? Is it ADHD? It might be that. And it might be medical trauma. It might be preverbal trauma. So when we're conceptualizing what's going on, this is an important thing for us to think about. So that's why I really thought it would be useful to highlight this topic. So the second thing that I wanted to talk about here is before I do that, before I move on, I do want to read this other quote because I thought it was really good. So there was another article because I went down the rabbit trail of articles. And this was in Brain Sciences. It's an editorial piece by Layla Crejero. And this was published this one, it's the role of sensory motor system in cognitive function. So I thought it would be really important to highlight it a little bit. I did want to read this quote because I thought it was really important for the conversation that we're having here. The discovery of neurons with sensory properties in frontal motor circuits and the discovery that these circuits send modulatory signals to the sensory parietal areas strongly challenged the classical idea of a motor system as a mere executor of commands and suggested that the sensory motor system may contribute to the cognitive processes necessary for interaction with the world. On this basis, embodied cognition theory states that the mind, body, and its surrounding environment are highly interrelated and hence mutually dependent upon each other. In this view, human cognition is deeply rooted in the body's interactions with its physical development. One key notion of embodiment is the sharing of neural resources between cognitive and sensory motor processes. So it just kind of, in my mind, in a really fancy, sciencey way, explain what I just kind of walked through about that early period of development, and that the motor system isn't just about make my arm go this way, make my other arm go this way, make my knee go this, learning how to crawl. It's a whole body experience. So if you're a Gestalt play therapist, this is probably right up your alley. That whole body Gestalt understanding of situations. So Steph says, I have a preemie on my caseload. This is going to switch my thinking a little. Yeah. That is awesome. Yeah, and we don't, one of the things that we know is those early experiences. We want to make sure to look at those. And when you look at the whole, the development of all those neural pathways and how everything is interrelated, does make a difference in terms of looking at these things. They may or may not have an impact, probably do. To the extent that brings them to play therapy, it's definitely important, I think, to take a look at this area. So one of the other things that I wanted to highlight about this study and what they did, it's not a study, the article, Treating Traumatized Children, Somatic Memories and Play Therapy. That's the article that I cited. You'll see that in the description. So if you want to go back and read it, it's really, really interesting. What the authors did in this article was walk you through play therapy through the beginning, the middle, and the end of treatment using a psychoanalytic play therapy model. So they looked at the roots of Darren's mental health difficulties within the language of psychoanalytic play therapy. And this guided their understanding of what was happening in the sessions and also how they were going to help facilitate the play therapy process to facilitate healing for Darren, who had experienced preverbal trauma. And so the authors highlighted this from beginning, middle, and end. And what they did is throughout, they demonstrated how play therapy how the preverbal trauma was stored in the child's body via the sensory and episodic memories and the use of play therapy to help that child make sense of, process, and overcome the negative impact that trauma had. And in this particular in this particular article with this case study of Darren experienced medical trauma early in his life. And so your theoretical model, your play therapy theory model is going to direct how you respond to clients during sessions and what type of intervention you're going to use. In psychoanalytic play therapy, the therapist responds to the child in similar ways to other theory models. I would say child-centered play therapy, probably even Gestalt play therapy. And so your model is going to influence or direct how you facilitate the sessions, what you do, what you say, how you respond. What's true across all play therapy models is unconditional positive regard and being fully present, therapeutically establishing a strong rapport, building safety and security. These are all foundational. And to be honest, if you don't have these, your theory model may or may not work. If I were to say, especially for new people just getting started, if I were to say, if you had to prioritize one over the other when your imposter syndrome kicks in and you're feeling overwhelmed and you don't remember what you're supposed to do, or you're not sure you're doing the right thing, default back to your therapeutic relationship, being fully present in the moment, just letting go and being present. I had somebody say to me, I was talking to somebody this week, she's new to the field, and she said it perfectly. She said, when I'm not sure what to do, I just focus on being fully present. This is my paraphrase of what she said. I just focus on being fully present at being with my client, and then it will just come to me. So it is important. Both are important. And your play theoretical model influences your conceptualization of the problem and how the problem is going to be addressed. So in that way, I think it's really important to think about those things. And if you're interested in learning more about, I know I mentioned it a little earlier, if you're interested in learning more about using case conceptualization in the play therapy process, doing some treatment planning, I do have some courses, Getting Grounded in Play Therapy, Case Conceptualization getting grounded in play therapy treatment planning, getting grounded in play therapy foundations. There's also a progress notes course in there. So I'll talk a little bit more about these at the end. If you're interested, make sure you stick around. I do think it's important to think about, and it's a balance, right? It's not all just focus only on theory. It's not only focus on case conceptualization. It's not only focus on, it's about a balance of your theory and relationship, and your relationship, therapeutic relationship with your client is what holds it all together. And then your model is going to dictate what you do in the sessions. And the other thing that I want to highlight for today is really the other thing that I found fascinating about this article is how they walked through the process of identifying themes and making sense of their themes, the themes in the play session, and how those themes that they identified and made sense of, then using their theory model, how they made decisions about what they were going to do. So I thought it was a really good article about how you walk through that process, and they laid everything out really, really well. And so what we know are there similarities of themes across all play therapy models, power and control, nurturing. Those are all pretty similar across all the models. The thing to think about is how you make sense of what those mean, how you make sense of those themes, and where the child is in the what stage of play therapy, where they are in the change process. So we're looking at those themes, we're making sense of those based on our theoretical play therapy model. So recognizing themes in play therapy is a very complex process, and it's based on a variety of factors, including your case conceptualization, including your play therapy model. This is going to influence your decision making about how you're going to respond in the sessions, what you're going to do to address the problems, how you're communicating with them in the sessions, how you're communicating with their parents or caregivers. All of those things are part of the process, and we're thinking about themes to help make sense of what's going on and where they are in the treatment process. The reality is, when you're using your play therapy model effectively, even when you struggle a little bit, as long as you kind of fall back onto your relationship, then the theory we don't really need to understand most of for the most part. I would say when we get lost and we're not sure what's going on, we say, trust the process. Trust the process is basically trusting that when you apply your play therapy model, it will guide you through all the process. So even when we get lost, and they talked about that in the article, getting lost, then you just go back to your case conceptualization, your play therapy model, and that will help you get back on track. So we use all of that for the decision making. For the most part, though, our clients are going to use the play to help them through the healing. We are providing that place for them. So ultimately, we don't necessarily have to understand for healing to take place. I think and depending on your theoretical model, that's even more true. In the end, though, I do think we need to understand what's going on in the sessions, because that does guide how we track in the sessions, what we're not going to say. So all of that is a balance. It's all very important. Your play therapy model is going to influence how you respond, what you say, how you understand where they are in the change process, how you recognize healing, and I would say also how you explain that to parents. So that is it for today. Let me do a quick wrap up. So what we know is that Research has shown us that traumatic experiences are stored in the body, and that includes preverbal trauma, including medical trauma. And so play therapy provides a developmentally effective way to help children. We're meeting them where they are. We're meeting them at their developmental level, and we're using play therapy to facilitate the healing for them. And this is accomplished by really being grounded in theoretical model that's going to help you through the change process. It's going to guide you how to make sense of things that are going on, what is being said in the sessions, how you're responding, what kind of interventions you're using. If you're using child-centered play therapy, that's going to look a lot different than Adlerian play therapy or Gestalt play therapy or psychoanalytic play therapy in many ways, especially depending on the age of the child because of their different abilities. The other thing that we know is identifying themes is going to be influenced by your play therapy theoretical model. And then you're going to use that information and how you make sense of that information to help you do your clinical decision making. How am I going to respond? What am I going to say? What am I going to do? How do I help them through that change process? Yep. So Carla, welcome, Carla. Carla, who's Centro Growing, says, does your kids sleep with stuffed animals or pillows, and ask about inner uterine experiences? But I resonate with you. Yeah. That's a really, I've had clients where parents will say their child remembered things. And if we look back at the research, and especially what is highlighted in this article, I think you can make the case that children do remember things when they are in utero. So it's an interesting thing to think about. And play therapy if they're experiencing some difficulties, then play therapy does provide a way to help them work through that process. So that is it for today. Just if you're interested in some of the courses that I talked about, getting grounded in play therapy case conceptualization, getting grounded in play therapy treatment planning, and play therapy case conceptualization, I walk you step by step through what questions to ask in the psychosocial assessment. I think a lot of times what I find is that therapists don't ask enough questions. They don't ask the right questions. I think they get through it as quickly as possible. And I like to make the case that if you go a little bit more in depth with your questions, then your case conceptualization is much more, I'll use the word robust, meaning you have a much more in-depth understanding of what's going on, and then using that to help you figure out what to do. So, one of the things that people commented earlier in the broadcast is that they use a combination, like child-centered play therapy, but they also use trauma-focused CBT. They use child-centered play therapy, and they also use CBT. So if you're using more of an integrated approach and not just strictly one model, then you definitely want to do your case conceptualization, because that influences your treatment planning. What are you going to do to help your client? And that case conceptualization is really important to be able to do that. So in the case conceptualization course, I walk you through questions to ask, why to ask them, to go more in depth. And then I walk you through how to develop your case conceptualization. And I use 4 different play therapy models to kind of walk you through how that would look a little different in each one. And then there's a couple other bonus models in there to kind of ground you culturally and ethically to make sure that you are kind of staying grounded and responsive to your clients' needs, because we all get derailed. That's all of us. Anyways, thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to next week, and I will see you then. Bye for now. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Next Level Play Therapy. I hope you found the discussion valuable and gained new insights and ideas to support your work helping children, adolescents, and families heal. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. Your feedback helps to improve and reach more people who can benefit from this information. Remember, play therapy is a powerful tool for healing and growth. Whether you're a new play therapist or experienced, I encourage you to continue your learning journey to unlock the potential of play in your own work and relationships. If you have any questions or topic suggestions for future episodes, I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on social media and visit my website at Renewing Hearts Play Therapy Training to stay updated on upcoming episodes, trainings, and resources. Thank you once again for listening to Next Level Play Therapy. Until next time, keep playing, learning, and growing.